Jeremy Taylor's most revolutionary discovery wasn't about pleasant dreams or wish fulfillment. It was about the nightmares we desperately try to forget and why ignoring them prevents us from accessing our deepest healing potential. In his 40 years of dream work, Taylor documented thousands of cases where individuals who learned to engage with their nightmares experienced profound psychological transformation. People who stopped running from their most terrifying dreams discovered that these nightmares contained the exact medicine their psyche needed for healing. Taylor called this discovery revolutionary because nightmares, he found, are never about punishment or pathology. They're about the unconscious mind's most urgent attempts to restore psychological balance. Today, I'll show you Taylor's most powerful discovery about nightmares and why he believed that facing your worst dreams either transforms you completely or keeps you trapped in cycles of unconscious suffering. The revealing case. The case that revealed Taylor's most revolutionary insight began with a client he described in his seminal work, Where People Fly and Water Runs Uphill. A middle-aged woman came to him in 1978, suffering from recurring nightmares that had plagued her for over 20 years. Every few weeks, she would dream of being chased through dark corridors by shadowy figures. She would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, unable to return to sleep. Traditional therapy had labeled these dreams as trauma symptoms to be medicated away. Sleep specialists had prescribed drugs to suppress REM sleep entirely. But Taylor, influenced by his work with Sonoy dream practices and Jungian analysis, suspected something different. He asked her to do what every expert had told her not to do: engage directly with the nightmare. Taylor wrote, "I instructed her to re-enter the dream consciously, to turn and face her pursuers instead of running. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about nightmares. When she finally confronted her dream attackers, they transformed. The shadowy figures became aspects of herself she had rejected and abandoned. Her anger, her sexuality, her creative power. The nightmare wasn't attacking her. It was trying to return these lost parts of herself." Taylor realized he wasn't treating a sleep disorder. He was witnessing what happens when the psyche uses its most dramatic imagery to force integration of split-off aspects of personality. This wasn't pathology. This was the unconscious mind's most sophisticated healing mechanism. The dangerous discovery. But Taylor discovered something even more disturbing about why we ignore nightmares. Because nightmares reveal uncomfortable truths about our psychological state, our culture has developed elaborate systems to avoid engaging with them. Taylor wrote in The Wisdom of Your Dreams, "We live in a culture that treats nightmares as meaningless neurological static, when they are actually the psyche's emergency broadcast system, alerting us to psychological imbalances that require immediate conscious attention." Taylor began investigating what he called nightmare avoidance syndrome, the systematic cultural and personal rejection of nightmare content. He discovered that people who chronically avoid their nightmares develop what he termed psychological stagnation. Modern research by Dr. Ernest Hartman validates Taylor's observations. Studies show that people who engage constructively with nightmare content demonstrate increased emotional resilience, enhanced problem-solving abilities, and greater psychological integration. But Taylor identified something more specific within his dream work methodology. Taylor observed that nightmares function as what he called compensatory dreams with urgency. Unlike regular dreams that gently balance conscious attitudes, nightmares use dramatic, disturbing imagery to force attention toward psychological contents that have been ignored or suppressed for too long. Taylor wrote, "Nightmares are the unconscious mind's way of saying, 'You haven't been listening to the subtle messages, so now we're turning up the volume.' They represent the psyche's emergency intervention when normal regulatory mechanisms have been ignored." The real danger, Taylor discovered, wasn't the nightmare content itself. The danger was in our cultural and personal habit of dismissing these powerful healing messages as meaningless disturbances. The 4 types of nightmare messages. Because Taylor observed that nightmare avoidance manifested differently in different individuals, he identified 4 distinct types of nightmare messages, each representing a different category of psychological healing opportunity. Type 1. The shadow integration nightmare. Taylor documented cases where nightmares featured the dreamer being attacked, chased, or threatened by dark figures. These dreams, he discovered, typically represented rejected aspects of the personality, demanding reintegration. Taylor wrote, "The monster in your nightmare is almost always a disowned part of yourself, appearing in frightening form because it has been rejected and abandoned for so long. These nightmares often feature being chased by unknown attackers, fighting with evil versions of yourself, being pursued by animals or monsters, confronting dark, menacing figures." Taylor observed that when dreamers learned to turn and face these figures with curiosity instead of fear, remarkable transformations occurred. The monsters would reveal themselves as abandoned creativity, suppressed anger, denied sexuality, or other essential aspects of wholeness. Type 2. The unfinished business nightmare. These nightmares involve scenarios where the dreamer is trying to complete important tasks but faces endless obstacles. Taylor discovered these dreams highlight areas of life where authentic action has been avoided or delayed. Common patterns include being late for crucial appointments, unable to find your way to important destinations, failing tests you haven't studied for, being unprepared for significant events. Taylor wrote, "These nightmares are the psyche's way of highlighting the gap between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are. They reveal where authentic living has been postponed." Type 3. The relationship truth nightmare. Taylor identified nightmares that reveal hidden dynamics in relationships, dreams where loved ones appear as threats, where betrayal is discovered, or where familiar people behave in disturbing ways. Taylor noted, "These dreams often show us relationship truths that our conscious mind isn't ready to acknowledge. They reveal dynamics we're sensing unconsciously, but avoiding consciously." Type 4. The spiritual awakening nightmare. The most intense category involves nightmares about death, apocalypse, or world destruction. Taylor discovered these often appear during periods of spiritual or psychological transformation. Taylor wrote, "Dreams of death and destruction rarely predict literal events. They typically represent the death of old ways of being to make room for new levels of consciousness." Understanding your specific nightmare type is crucial because each requires different approaches to what Taylor called nightmare integration work. The 3 specific dangers of ignoring nightmares. Because Taylor observed the devastating effects of nightmare avoidance on his clients, he concluded that ignoring these powerful healing messages posed genuine dangers to psychological development and overall well-being. Danger 1. Psychological stagnation. Taylor wrote, "When we systematically avoid nightmare content, we cut ourselves off from the psyche's most urgent communications about necessary changes in our lives." He observed that people who chronically dismiss nightmares often remain stuck in dysfunctional patterns, relationships, and life circumstances long past their natural expiration dates. The nightmare served as an early warning system that was being ignored. Taylor documented cases where individuals avoided career change dreams, relationship warning dreams, and health alert dreams, only to face these issues as unavoidable crises months or years later. Danger 2. Somatic symptom development. Most concerning, Taylor found that when psychological contents represented in nightmares aren't processed consciously, they often manifest as physical symptoms or chronic health conditions. Taylor wrote, "The body becomes the battlefield for psychological conflicts that consciousness refuses to engage with directly. Nightmares are often the last stop before psychosomatic illness." He documented patterns where specific nightmare themes correlated with particular health issues. Chase dreams preceding anxiety disorders, death dreams before depression, betrayal dreams before immune system problems. Danger 3. Shadow projection and relationship destruction. Taylor discovered that when people avoid integrating shadow content revealed in nightmares, they unconsciously project these rejected aspects onto others, creating relationship conflicts and social problems. Taylor wrote, "What we refuse to face in our nightmares, we end up facing in our relationships as external conflicts. The nightmare monster we won't acknowledge internally becomes the difficult person we can't tolerate externally." This creates what Taylor called the projection cycle, where nightmare avoidance leads to unconscious projection, which creates interpersonal conflicts that mirror the original nightmare content. Taylor's integration method, the title approach. Because nightmare integration posed such importance for psychological health, Taylor developed what he called the title method, a systematic approach to transforming nightmare content into healing wisdom. Crow. T. Take the dream seriously. Taylor taught clients to first acknowledge that nightmares carry important messages rather than dismissing them as meaningless disturbances. He wrote, "The first step in nightmare work is overcoming our cultural conditioning that dreams don't matter. Every nightmare contains multiple layers of meaning that can contribute to healing and growth." Technique. Taylor instructed clients to write down nightmare content immediately upon waking, treating it as important psychological data rather than something to forget quickly. Identify personal associations. The second step involves exploring what nightmare symbols and scenarios mean specifically to the dreamer, rather than relying on universal dream dictionaries. Taylor wrote, "Dream symbols are highly personal. The monster that represents rejected creativity to one person might represent suppressed anger to another. Only the dreamer can determine authentic meaning." Technique. Taylor used association exercises where clients explore what each nightmare element reminds them of in their waking life, focusing on emotional connections rather than logical interpretations. T. Transform through re-entry. The crucial third step involves consciously re-entering the nightmare with new intentions, particularly turning to face threatening figures or situations instead of running away. Taylor wrote, "The moment we turn to face what pursues us in nightmares, transformation becomes possible. What appeared as enemy reveals itself as wounded ally." Technique. Taylor guided clients through conscious re-entry exercises, visualization practices where they re-experience the nightmare, but with conscious choice and curiosity instead of unconscious terror. L. Learn the deeper message. The fourth step focuses on understanding what the nightmare reveals about necessary life changes, psychological integration needs, or spiritual development opportunities. Taylor observed, "Nightmares are rarely about the literal content. They're about the psychological and spiritual development opportunities the literal content represents." Embody the integration. The final step involves taking concrete action in waking life based on nightmare insights, making the changes, having the conversations, or addressing the issues the nightmare highlighted. Taylor wrote, "Nightmare work isn't complete until it manifests as conscious change in actual living. The dream is the diagnosis. Conscious action is the medicine." Historical cases. Integration versus avoidance. Because Taylor understood that nightmare engagement either transforms or imprisons individuals, he studied both successful integration cases and chronic avoidance patterns to understand the difference. The case of chronic avoidance. Taylor documented a client who had experienced the same nightmare weekly for 15 years, dreams of drowning in dark water while calling for help that never came. For over a decade, she had used sleep medications, distraction techniques, and cognitive reframing to avoid the dream's emotional impact. Taylor wrote, "By the time she came to me, the nightmare had begun manifesting as a series of external crises, panic attacks near water, fear of emotional intimacy, and a pattern of feeling helpless in important life situations." When they finally worked with the nightmare directly, Taylor discovered the drowning represented her terror of emotional depth and authentic intimacy. She had been drowning in superficial relationships while her deeper self called for authentic connection. Taylor noted, 15 years of avoidance had created exactly the external life situation the nightmare was trying to prevent: emotional isolation and a sense of helplessness in relationships. The case of successful integration. Taylor extensively documented a client who experienced recurring nightmares about being trapped in a burning building. Instead of avoiding these dreams, he engaged with them using Taylor's methods. Through re-entry work, the client discovered that the burning building represented his corporate job that was burning up his creativity and authentic self. The nightmare wasn't predicting disaster. It was highlighting a situation that was already destructive to his psychological well-being. Taylor wrote, "Within 6 months of integrating his nightmare message, He had transitioned to work that honored his creative nature. The nightmares stopped because their message had been received and acted upon. Taylor noted that successful integration required both psychological understanding and concrete life changes based on nightmare insights. Finding safe support for nightmare work, 9 o'clock to 10:30. Because individuals engaging in nightmare work often face resistance from others, Taylor emphasized the crucial importance of finding what he called dream-friendly support. Taylor wrote in Dream Work, "Nightmare integration requires witnessing by those capable of understanding that these dreams carry healing rather than pathology." Type 1. Trained dream workers. Taylor identified therapists, counselors, and spiritual guides specifically trained in dream work methodologies who understand nightmares as healing opportunities rather than symptoms to suppress. These professionals recognize that nightmare engagement is a sign of psychological courage rather than mental instability. Type 2. Dream groups and communities. Taylor pioneered dream-sharing groups where individuals could safely explore nightmare content with others engaged in similar work. Taylor wrote, "In dream community, nightmares lose their power to isolate and shame. When others receive your dreams with curiosity and respect, healing accelerates dramatically." Type 3. Spiritually oriented supporters. Taylor identified individuals from contemplative traditions who understand nightmares as spiritual communications rather than psychological problems. These might include meditation teachers, shamanic practitioners, or others familiar with inner work who can support nightmare integration without fear or judgment. Recognition indicators. Taylor developed specific signs for identifying safe nightmare work support. They ask curious questions about dream content rather than immediately suggesting medication or suppression. They demonstrate comfort with dark psychological material without becoming frightened or judgmental. They understand the difference between nightmare content and actual psychological danger. They encourage engagement with dream material rather than avoidance. They recognize nightmare work as a form of spiritual and psychological development, the 4 stages of nightmare transformation. Because integrated nightmare work serves profound healing purposes, Taylor viewed successful nightmare integration as essential, not just for individual well-being, but for accessing our deepest healing potential. Stage 1. Recognition without terror. The first transformation occurs when you learn to acknowledge nightmare content without being overwhelmed by fear or the need to immediately forget. Taylor called this conscious witnessing, the ability to remain present with disturbing dream imagery without dissociating or suppressing. Taylor wrote, "The beginning of nightmare healing is the recognition that your psyche is trying to help you, not harm you, even when the imagery appears frightening." Stage 2. Engagement without overwhelm. The second stage involves learning to explore nightmare content actively while maintaining psychological stability and groundedness. Taylor called this conscious participation, moving from passive victim in the nightmare to active explorer of its meaning. Taylor observed, "The empowered dreamer engages with nightmare content as valuable information rather than traumatic attack." Stage 3. Integration without avoidance. The third transformation happens when nightmare insights become integrated into conscious awareness and decision-making without denial or minimization. Taylor called this embodied wisdom, using nightmare insights to make actual changes in waking life rather than treating them as interesting but irrelevant psychological phenomena. Taylor wrote, "True nightmare work manifests as transformed living, not just understanding." Stage 4. Guidance without dependency. The final stage involves what Taylor called nightmare literacy, the ability to work with ongoing nightmare content as a natural source of psychological and spiritual guidance without becoming dependent on external interpretation. Taylor observed, "The mature dreamer develops relationship with their own unconscious wisdom, using nightmares as one source of inner guidance among many." Common pitfalls in nightmare work. Because the path of nightmare integration contains specific challenges, Taylor documented the most common ways individuals sabotage their own healing process. Pitfall 1. The literal interpretation trap. Taylor wrote, "The biggest mistake in nightmare work is assuming dreams predict literal future events, rather than revealing current psychological dynamics. People often become terrified that nightmare content will manifest literally, missing the symbolic and psychological messages entirely." Pitfall 2. The endless analysis loop. Taylor documented cases where individuals became obsessed with analyzing nightmare symbolism without ever taking action based on dream insights. He warned, "Nightmare work without life integration is just intellectual entertainment. The goal is transformation, not interpretation." Pitfall 3. The heroic avoidance. Some individuals use spiritual bypassing techniques to avoid genuine engagement with nightmare content, pretending they've transcended the need for shadow work. Taylor observed, "True transcendence includes integration, not avoidance of all psychological material." Pitfall 4. The overwhelming immersion. Others become so fascinated with nightmare content that they lose grounding in daily life, becoming unbalanced toward the unconscious realm. Taylor emphasized, "Healthy nightmare work enhances everyday living rather than replacing it with dream obsession." The integration maintenance practices. Taylor developed ongoing practices for maintaining healthy relationship with nightmare content throughout life. Regular dream journaling, consistent recording of all dreams, including nightmares, to maintain conscious relationship with unconscious processes. Monthly integration review. Periodic assessment of how nightmare insights have manifested as actual life changes and psychological development. Ongoing shadow work. Continuous engagement with rejected aspects of personality to prevent the buildup of psychological contents that manifest as nightmares. Community connection. Maintaining relationships with others who understand and support nightmare work as legitimate psychological and spiritual practice. Creative expression. Using art, writing, movement, or other creative outlets to process and integrate nightmare content constructively. Taylor wrote, "Nightmare work is not a problem to be solved but a lifelong conversation with the depths of your own psyche." The evolutionary purpose of nightmares. Because Taylor understood nightmares within the context of psychological and spiritual development, he viewed nightmare integration as serving an essential function for human consciousness evolution. Taylor wrote in The Living Labyrinth, "Nightmares represent the psyche's refusal to accept psychological stagnation. They are evolution's way of ensuring continued growth and development throughout the lifespan." The historical pattern. Taylor observed that throughout history, individuals who engaged constructively with nightmare content often became healers, artists, spiritual teachers, and wisdom carriers for their communities. They served as bridges between conscious and unconscious realms, helping others access healing wisdom that normal consciousness couldn't provide. Modern applications. Taylor believed that in the contemporary era, nightmare integration might be essential for processing collective trauma and cultural shadows, developing emotional resilience in increasingly complex times, accessing creative solutions to personal and collective problems, maintaining psychological health in overstimulating environments, facilitating spiritual development beyond conventional religious frameworks. The service function. Taylor's insight was that nightmare integration serves not just individual healing but collective wisdom development. People who learn to work constructively with their own nightmares often develop the capacity to help others engage with difficult psychological material without fear or avoidance. The ultimate integration. At the highest level of development, Taylor observed, individuals with nightmare integration skills hold their dream experiences as valuable guidance without being controlled by them. Taylor called this dream wisdom, the ability to receive nightmare messages as helpful information while maintaining groundedness in everyday life. Taylor wrote, "The mature relationship with nightmares transforms them from experiences of powerlessness into sources of empowerment and insight." Remember Taylor's client from 1978, the woman who had suffered from chase nightmares for 20 years? After working with Taylor's integration methods, her life transformed completely. She learned that her nightmare pursuers represented her own rejected power and creativity. She discovered that running from them in dreams paralleled how she ran from opportunity and authentic self-expression in waking life. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing nightmares as attacks and began understanding them as invitations to reclaim lost aspects of herself. Taylor wrote about her transformation. The client learned not to fear her dreams but to dance with them. Her nightmares became allies rather than enemies, guides rather than tormentors. This represents Taylor's most revolutionary discovery, that nightmares are not evidence of psychological dysfunction, but opportunities for profound healing and integration. Closing your nightmares aren't random neurological misfires or meaningless psychological disturbances. They're your unconscious mind's most urgent communications about healing opportunities you haven't yet recognized. You're not broken because you have disturbing dreams. You're psychologically alive and responsive to your own development needs. The question isn't whether you should suppress your nightmares to sleep peacefully. The question is whether you'll develop the courage to engage with them as the powerful healing messages they actually are. Taylor's integration method offers a path from nightmare avoidance to conscious engagement, from psychological stagnation to dynamic growth, from seeing nightmares as problems to recognizing them as solutions. You were born with an unconscious mind sophisticated enough to communicate through symbols, metaphors, and dramatic imagery. Your nightmares are evidence of this sophistication, not its failure. Learn to work with them consciously and you become exactly what Taylor believed nightmare-integrated individuals were meant to be: conscious participants in your own healing and development. Your nightmares are not your burden. Your avoidance of their wisdom is your burden. Learn to engage with them consciously and you access healing resources that most people never discover. Taylor's most revolutionary discovery wasn't that nightmares contain healing wisdom. It's that most people who have nightmares never learn to access the healing they offer. The danger isn't in having disturbing dreams. It's in dismissing them before they can reveal the profound transformation they're trying to facilitate. You are not too disturbed for healing. Your nightmares are exactly the medicine your psyche knows you need. Once you learn to receive their messages as consciously as Taylor learned to receive his. If you recognize yourself in Taylor's description of nightmare avoiders or have experienced the healing power of dream work, share in the comments your experience with nightmare integration. Your journey connects with others walking the same path toward psychological wholeness. Subscribe for more insights into dream work and depth psychology approaches that reveal the wisdom hidden in our most challenging experiences. If you're ready to explore more about working with difficult psychological material, check out my video on shadow work techniques that complement nightmare integration practices.